Sarah Chen walked into the dimly lit dojo at exactly 9 p.m., her worn sneakers squeaking against the polished wooden floor. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting dancing shadows across the training mats where 5 black-belted men waited in formation.
Their eyes followed her every movement with predatory intensity, arms crossed, muscles tensed beneath their traditional white Gs. What they didn't know was that the quiet woman in faded jeans and an oversized hoodie had just spent the last 3 years in hiding, running from a past that would change everything. They thought they knew about strength, skill, and survival.
Tonight, their carefully planned ambush would uncover a secret that had been buried under newspaper headlines, championship trophies, and a tragedy that forced the world's most feared karate champion to disappear completely. The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Sarah's fingers unconsciously flexed at her sides, a habit she'd developed during countless hours of training that had once made her untouchable. But that was before the accident, before she lost everything, before she became just another face in the crowd, invisible and forgotten. One of the men stepped forward, his black belt catching the harsh light. "You shouldn't have come here alone," he said, his voice echoing off the walls of the empty dojo. What happened next would remind everyone present why some legends are born from the ashes of tragedy, and why the most dangerous opponents are often the ones who have nothing left to lose. Sarah Chen had been living in Millbrook for exactly 3 months when she first noticed them watching her. It started small. A glance held too long at the grocery store, whispered conversations that stopped when she passed by, shadows that seemed to follow her home from her job at the local library. For someone trying to rebuild her life from scratch, the attention was unwelcome and concerning. The small town of Millbrook prided itself on being quiet and safe, the kind of place where everyone knew their neighbors and nothing exciting ever happened. Sarah had chosen it precisely for these reasons. After everything that had happened in her previous life, she craved anonymity more than anything else. She rented a small apartment above the bakery on Main Street, took a job organizing books and helping elderly patrons find their favorite romance novels, and tried to convince herself that this simple existence was enough. But peace, Sarah was learning, was a luxury that some people weren't allowed to have. The first real confrontation came on a Tuesday evening as she was walking home from work. The sun had already set and the streetlights cast long shadows between the old oak trees that lined Maple Avenue. She heard footsteps behind her matching her pace, and felt the familiar tightness in her chest that had become her constant companion since moving here. "Hey, you!" a voice called out. Sarah kept walking, her heart rate increasing despite her efforts to stay calm. "I'm talking to you, lady." She turned around to find a man in his 30s approaching her, his confident stride and the way he held his shoulders telling her immediately that he had martial arts training. His name was Derek Morrison, though she wouldn't learn this until later. He owned a small construction company in town and taught karate classes at the community center on weekends. To most people in Millbrook, he was a respected member of the community. To Sarah, he was trouble. "Can I help you?" she asked, keeping her voice steady and her hands relaxed at her sides. Years of training had taught her to read body language, and everything about Derek's posture screamed aggression, barely held in check. "My friends and I have been talking," Derek said, stopping about 6 feet away from her. "We're wondering what someone like you is doing in a place like this." "You don't fit in here, you know. Too quiet, too careful. Makes people nervous." Sarah felt a familiar anger begin to build in her chest, but she pushed it down. Getting angry had cost her everything once before. She couldn't let it happen again. "I work at the library," she said simply. "I mind my own business. I don't cause trouble." Derek laughed, but there was no humor in it. "See, that's what's weird. Most people, when they move to a new town, they try to make friends. They join clubs, go to church, hang out at Murphy's Bar on Friday nights. But you're like a ghost. Makes people wonder what you're hiding." The truth was that Sarah was hiding everything. Her real name wasn't even Sarah Chen. That was just one of several identities she'd carefully constructed over the past 3 years. Her real name was Sarah Nakamura, and until 3 years ago she had been one of the most famous martial artists in the world. She had won 7 international karate championships, had been featured on the covers of martial arts magazines, and had been training for the Olympics when her world came crashing down. The accident had happened during a demonstration at a high school in Los Angeles. She was showing a group of students some advanced techniques when one of them, a 17-year-old named Marcus Williams, had tried to copy a move he wasn't ready for. Sarah had tried to help him, to guide him through the technique safely, but something went wrong. Marcus fell badly, hitting his head on the mat with a sickening thud that Sarah still heard in her nightmares. He had been in a coma for 2 months.
When he finally woke up, he had permanent brain damage. His family sued her, the media turned against her, and her career was over in a matter of weeks. Why I had this book in the next 18 months.
The guilt and shame had been overwhelming. Sarah had disappeared from public life, changed her name, and spent the last 3 years moving from town to town, trying to find some kind of peace.
But Derek Morrison didn't know any of this. To him, she was just a strange woman who didn't belong, and in his mind, that made her a problem that needed to be dealt with.
I'm not hiding anything, Sarah lied, taking a step back. I just prefer to keep to myself. Yeah, well, that's not how things work around here, Derek said, moving closer.
This is a tight-knit community. We look out for each other, but we also keep an eye on outsiders.
Especially outsiders who act like they're carrying secrets. Sarah could see this conversation was going nowhere good.
Derek was the type of man who used his size and training to intimidate people, probably thinking it made him some kind of hero. She'd met dozens of men like him over the years, martial artists who had learned enough to be dangerous but not enough to be wise.
I should get home, she said, turning to leave. We're not done talking, Derek said, grabbing her arm. The moment his hand touched her, Sarah's body reacted instinctively. Every muscle in her arm tensed, and she had to fight the overwhelming urge to break his grip and put him on the ground. The techniques came flooding back to her mind, a simple twist of her wrist, a step to the side, and Derek would find himself face down on the sidewalk before he knew what happened. But she couldn't.
She wouldn't. That life was behind her. Instead, she looked down at his hand on her arm and then back up at his face. "Please let go of me," she said quietly. Something in her voice must have gotten through to him because Derek released her arm and took a step back, but his eyes were still hard, still suspicious.
This isn't over, he said. My friends and I are going to be keeping a close eye on you.
One wrong move, and you'll find out what kind of justice we serve in this town. Sarah walked away without responding, her heart pounding and her hands shaking.
When she reached her apartment, she locked the door behind her and leaned against it, trying to catch her breath. She had worked so hard to build this quiet life, to find some kind of peace after the destruction of her career.
Now it seemed like even that small comfort was going to be taken away from her. Over the next few weeks, the harassment escalated. Derek wasn't working alone. He had 4 friends who shared his suspicious nature and his belief that they were somehow the unofficial guardians of Millbrook's safety. There was Marcus Thompson, a former military police officer who now worked as a security guard at the local mall.
James Rodriguez had been a college wrestler before taking over his father's auto repair shop. Kevin Park taught martial arts at the same community center where Derek held his classes.
And David Kim was a personal trainer who ran a small gym on the outskirts of town. All 5 men had black belts in various martial arts disciplines, and all 5 had decided that Sarah Chen was a threat that needed to be eliminated.
They started small. Sarah would find her car tires mysteriously flat when she came out of work. Her mailbox was vandalized twice in 1 week. Someone threw rocks at her apartment windows in the middle of the night. The harassment was subtle enough that she couldn't prove it was them, but obvious enough that she knew exactly who was responsible. Sarah tried to ignore it, hoping they would eventually get bored and move on to someone else. She had dealt with harassment before, during the worst days of the media coverage after Marcus Williams' accident. She knew how to keep her head down, how to endure, how to wait for the storm to pass. But Derek and his friends weren't interested in just making her uncomfortable. They wanted her gone, and they were willing to escalate their tactics to achieve that goal. The breaking point came on a Friday night in late October. Sarah was working late at the library helping Mrs. Patterson find some books for her grandson's school project when she heard a loud crash from the front of the building. When she went to investigate, she found that someone had thrown a brick through the main window. Attached to the brick was a note, "Leave town or we'll make you leave." Mrs. Patterson was shaken and frightened, and Sarah had to help her call her son to come pick her up. After the police had come and gone, taking their report but offering little hope of catching the vandals, Sarah sat alone in the library surrounded by broken glass and tried to figure out what to do next. She could leave town again, pack up her few belongings, and find another place to disappear. It wouldn't be the first time she'd had to start over. But she was tired of running, tired of letting other people control her life through fear and intimidation. For the first time in 3 years, Sarah allowed herself to remember who she used to be. Before the accident, before the guilt and shame and self-imposed exile, she had been strong. She had been feared and respected by competitors around the world. She had been Sarah Nakamura, 7-time international champion, and she had never backed down from a fight. Maybe it was time to remind herself, and Derek Morrison, what that meant. The next morning,
Sarah walked into Murphy's bar, where she knew Derek and his friends spent their Saturday afternoons. The bar was dimly lit and smelled of beer and cigarettes, and conversation stopped when she walked through the door.
Derek was sitting at a corner table with Marcus, James, Kevin, and David, and all 5 men looked up at her with surprise and suspicion.
Sarah walked directly to their table and stood there for a moment, looking at each of them in turn. They were all physically intimidating men, all trained fighters, all convinced that they were the toughest people in Millbrook. They had no idea what they were dealing with. "I got your message," Sarah said quietly. "The brick through the library window. Very subtle." Derek leaned back in his chair and smiled. "I don't know what you're talking about."
Yes, you do, Sarah said.
All of you do. You want me gone, and you're willing to vandalize public property and terrorize an elderly woman to make it happen.
The question is, what are you going to do when I don't leave? The 5 men exchanged glances, and Sarah could see them mentally preparing for a confrontation. They thought they had her cornered, 5 against 1, in a place where they had the advantage. "Maybe we need to have a more serious conversation about your future in this town," Derek said, standing up. His friends followed suit, forming a loose circle around Sarah. "I think that's a good idea," Sarah said, "but not here and not now. There's an old dojo on Elm Street that's been closed for years. Meet me there tonight at 9 o'clock and we'll settle this once and for all." Derek laughed. "You're challenging us to a fight?" "Lady, I don't know what kind of movies you've been watching, but this is real life. You're about to get yourself seriously hurt." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time since she'd arrived in Millbrook, she let some of her old confidence show in her eyes. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe you're about to find out why I've been hiding." Sarah spent the rest of Saturday afternoon preparing for what was to come. She hadn't trained seriously in over 3 years, but muscle memory was a powerful thing. As she stretched in her small apartment, her body began to remember movements that had once been as natural as breathing. The old dojo on Elm Street had been abandoned for nearly 5 years. It had belonged to Master Tanaka, an elderly Japanese man who had taught traditional karate until arthritis and age forced him to retire. The building was still structurally sound, but the windows were boarded up, and weeds grew through cracks in the parking lot. It was the perfect place for a confrontation that nobody wanted the police to interrupt. As the sun began to set, Sarah made her way to the dojo. She wore simple black clothing, jeans and a t-shirt that would allow her to move freely. Her long black hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and for the first time in years, she felt like herself again. The memories came flooding back as she approached the building. She remembered the first time she had walked into a dojo, scared and uncertain, just a 12-year-old girl whose parents thought martial arts might help her build confidence. She remembered her first tournament, her first victory, the moment she realized she had found her calling in life. But she also remembered the last time she had fought competitively. It was the Western Regional Championships, just 3 months before the accident that would destroy her career. She had faced Elena Rodriguez, a tough competitor from Arizona who had given her one of the hardest fights of her life. Sarah had won, but barely, and she remembered thinking afterward that she was getting older, that maybe it was time to start thinking about what came after competition. She had never imagined it would end the way it did. Derek and his friends were already waiting when she arrived. They had managed to get inside the building somehow, probably through a back window or door that wasn't properly secured. The main training area was dimly lit by a few battery-powered lanterns they had brought, casting long shadows across the old wooden floor. All 5 men were dressed in their karate gis, their black belts tied carefully around their waists. They looked like they were taking this seriously, which was both good and bad. Good because it meant they would fight with discipline, rather than just trying to overwhelm her with brute force. Bad because it meant they were all skilled enough to be genuinely dangerous. "I wasn't sure you'd actually show up," Derek said as Sarah walked into the training area. "Thought you might come to your senses and just pack your bags instead." "I'm tired of running," Sarah replied simply. She looked around the dojo, taking in the faded posters on the walls showing proper karate stances and techniques. Master Tanaka had been old school, focused on traditional forms and philosophy as much as practical fighting. Sarah had trained in places like this when she was younger, before she started focusing exclusively on competition fighting. "So how do you want to do this?" she asked. "All 5 of you at once, or do you want to take turns?" The men exchanged glances. They had clearly expected her to be more intimidated, more desperate to negotiate her way out of the situation. "One at a time seems fair," Kevin Park said. He was the youngest of the group, probably in his mid-20s, with the lean build of someone who spent most of his time teaching rather than competing. "Unless you prefer to just apologize and promise to leave town quietly." Sarah shook her head. I'm done apologizing for things that aren't my fault. It was a statement that carried more weight than any of them could understand. Sarah had spent the last 3 years apologizing. To Marcus Williams' family, to her former sponsors, to herself. She had accepted responsibility for an accident that could have happened to anyone, and she had allowed that guilt to define her entire existence. Tonight, that was going to change.
Marcus Thompson stepped forward first. He was the largest of the 5 men, with the solid build of someone who had spent years in the military.
His movements were precise and controlled as he bowed formally to Sarah, showing respect for the ritual even if he didn't respect her as an opponent. "I'll try to make this quick," he said.
"I don't enjoy hurting women." Sarah bowed back, falling into the formal patterns that had been drilled into her since childhood. "I appreciate that," she said. "But don't hold back on my account." Marcus settled into a fighting stance, and Sarah could immediately see that he was competent but not exceptional. His form was good, his balance was solid, but there was a stiffness to his movements that suggested he had learned karate as an adult rather than growing up with it. He was dangerous enough to hurt an untrained opponent, but against someone with Sarah's background, he was severely outclassed. The problem was that Sarah's background was supposed to be a secret. Marcus moved first, throwing a straight punch aimed at Sarah's midsection. It was a good technique properly executed, but Sarah saw it coming from the moment he shifted his weight. She stepped to the side and let the punch pass harmlessly by, then tapped him lightly on the shoulder as he stumbled past. "You're telegraphing your attacks," she said. "Try to keep your shoulders level when you punch." Marcus spun around, clearly annoyed that she was giving him advice in the middle of a fight. He threw a combination this time. Sarah avoided both strikes easily, moving with a fluid grace that spoke of years of high-level training. "Stop playing around," Derek called out from the sidelines. "End this." Marcus nodded and launched into a more aggressive attack, throwing punches and kicks in rapid succession. He was trying to overwhelm her with volume, hoping that even if she could avoid most of his strikes, 1 or 2 might get through. But Sarah had faced opponents like this hundreds of times before. She had sparred with Olympic medalists, world champions, fighters who could throw combinations faster and more accurately than Marcus could even imagine. Reading his attacks and countering them was as natural as breathing. She caught his next punch in her hand, twisted his wrist in a direction it wasn't meant to go, and swept his legs out from under him in one smooth motion. Marcus hit the floor hard, gasping for breath as Sarah stood over him. "Stay down," she said quietly. "You're not hurt, but you will be if you keep trying." Marcus looked up at her with confusion and a growing understanding that he had seriously underestimated his opponent.
He stayed down.
James Rodriguez was next. He was shorter than Marcus but more compact, with the thick shoulders and low center of gravity of a former wrestler. His fighting style was completely different. Where Marcus had relied on striking, James immediately tried to close distance and take the fight to the ground. It was a smart strategy against most opponents. Wrestling was one of the most effective martial arts in real-world situations, and most people who trained primarily in striking arts struggled when the fight went to the mat. But Sarah had trained in grappling as well as striking. She had learned judo and Brazilian jiu-jitsu to complement her karate, understanding that a complete fighter needed to be dangerous in all ranges of combat. James shot in for a takedown, aiming to grab Sarah around the waist and drive her to the ground. Sarah stuffed the attempt easily, sprawling her legs back and pushing down on James's head to prevent him from getting the grip he needed. Before he could reset and try again, Sarah grabbed him in a front headlock and threw him with a technique called a guillotine throw. James flew through the air and landed on his back with a thud that echoed through the empty dojo. "Wrestling is good," Sarah said as James rolled over onto his hands and knees, trying to clear his head. "But you need to set up your takedowns better. You can't just shoot in without creating an opening first." James looked up at her with a mixture of respect and bewilderment. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" It was the first crack in their collective certainty that they were dealing with just another scared woman who had gotten in over her head. Sarah could see doubt beginning to creep into the eyes of the 3 men who were still waiting their turn. Kevin Park was next, and he approached the fight with considerably more caution than his predecessors. He was a martial arts instructor himself, and he could recognize skill when he saw it. Sarah's movements, her timing, her technical knowledge, none of it was consistent with someone who had just picked up a few self-defense classes at the local gym. "You've done this before," Kevin said as he settled into his fighting stance. "I mean really done this, at a high level." Sarah nodded. "Yes, I have." "Who are you?" It was a simple question, but it carried the weight of everything Sarah had been trying to hide for the past 3 years. She looked around the dojo at the 5 men who had been terrorizing her and made a decision that would change everything. "My name is Sarah Nakamura," she said, "and I used to be someone you would have recognized." The name didn't immediately register with all of them. But Kevin's eyes widened in recognition. He had clearly followed competitive martial arts more closely than his friends. "Holy shit," he breathed. "You're the Sarah Nakamura, 7-time world champion. You were supposed to fight in the Olympics." Derek stepped forward from the sidelines. "What are you talking about?" "She's one of the best karate competitors in history," Kevin explained, his voice filled with awe. "I've watched videos of her fights. She's a legend." Sarah felt a familiar mixture of pride and shame at the recognition. She had worked her entire life to build that reputation, but it had been destroyed in a single moment of tragedy. She corrected. "I was a legend. Now I'm just someone trying to live quietly." "But what are you doing here?" Kevin asked. "What happened to you? You just disappeared after—" He trailed off as he remembered the story. "The accident during the demonstration. The injured student. The lawsuits and media coverage that had destroyed her career. After I put a kid in the hospital," Sarah finished. "After I proved that all my skill and training meant nothing if I couldn't keep people safe." The dojo fell silent. Even Derek seemed to understand that they had stumbled into something much bigger than they had anticipated. "Look," Kevin said, backing away slightly. "If you're really Sarah Nakamura, then we've made a huge mistake. We had no idea who you were." Sarah shook her head. "It doesn't matter who I used to be. You decided I didn't belong here, based on nothing but suspicion and paranoia. You harassed me, vandalized property, terrorized an elderly woman. My identity doesn't change any of that." Derek stepped forward again, his pride clearly wounded by the revelation. "I don't care what your name is or what tournaments you won 10 years ago. You're still an outsider, and you're still hiding something. Champions don't disappear and take jobs at libraries unless they're running from something." "You're right," Sarah said. "I am running from something. I'm running from the memory of a 17-year-old boy who tried to impress me with a technique he wasn't ready for. I'm running from the sound he made when he hit the ground. I'm running from his mother crying in a hospital hallway asking me why I didn't stop him from trying something so dangerous." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "But I'm tired of running, and I'm tired of people like you deciding that being different or quiet or private makes someone dangerous. So we're going to finish this and then you're going to leave me alone." Derek's face hardened. "Fine. But don't expect us to go easy on you just because you used to be famous." The remaining 3 men, Derek, David, and Kevin, formed a triangle around Sarah. The rules had changed. This was no longer a series of one-on-one fights. This was 3 trained fighters against 1 woman, and they were done showing restraint. Sarah looked at each of them in turn, measuring their stances, their reach, their probable fighting styles. She had been in situations like this before, though usually in controlled tournament environments with referees and safety equipment. But muscle memory was a powerful thing, and as the 3 men began to close in on her, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years. She felt like herself again. The moment before a fight begins is sacred. Sarah had forgotten how much she missed that sensation, the heightened awareness, the way time seemed to slow down, the absolute clarity that came when everything else in the world faded away except the opponents in front of her. Derek, David, and Kevin spread out in a triangle formation, each taking a position that would prevent Sarah from focusing on just one attacker. It was smart tactical thinking, the kind of coordinated approach that could overwhelm even a skilled fighter if executed properly. But they were thinking like people who fought one-on-one matches with rules and referees. Sarah had trained for situations exactly like this. Kevin moved first, coming in from her left side with a high kick aimed at her head. It was a beautiful technique, perfectly executed, the kind of kick that would have scored points in any tournament. But tournaments weren't real fights, and real fights didn't pause when someone landed a clean strike. Sarah ducked under the kick and immediately pivoted toward David, who was advancing from her right. She could see him preparing to throw a punch, his weight shifting forward, his shoulder dropping slightly as he wound up for maximum power. Instead of backing away to create distance, Sarah moved forward, getting inside David's reach before he could fully extend his arm. He drove her elbow upward, catching him under the chin with enough force to snap his head back and send him stumbling backward. But she couldn't focus on David because Derek was already attacking from behind. Sarah spun around just in time to see him throwing a straight punch aimed at the back of her head. She caught his wrist in both hands, used his forward momentum against him, and threw him over her shoulder with a technique called an ippon seonaje.
Derek hit the wooden floor hard, the sound echoing through the empty dojo like a gunshot. All this happened in less than 3 seconds. Kevin had recovered from his missed kick and was coming at her again, this time with a series of rapid punches. He was fast and technically proficient, but Sarah could see every strike coming before he threw it. She weaved between his punches, her head moving just enough to let each one pass harmlessly by. "How is she doing this?" David gasped, holding his jaw where her elbow had connected.
"She's reading us," Kevin said, backing away to reassess. "She knows what we're going to do before we do it."
It was true, though not in the mystical way Kevin seemed to think. Sarah had spent 15 years studying martial arts at the highest level. She had faced opponents from dozens of different styles and countries, each with their own techniques and strategies. After a while, you started to see patterns in the way people moved, the way they prepared their attacks, the subtle shifts in balance and posture that telegraphed their intentions. Derek had gotten back to his feet, moving more cautiously now. His left shoulder was clearly bothering him from the throw, but he was trying not to show it.
She can't fight all of us at once. They came at her simultaneously. Derek from the front, Kevin from the left, David from the right.
It should have been overwhelming. 3 black belts attacking in perfect coordination should have been enough to defeat any single opponent. But Sarah wasn't any single opponent. She had been 7-time world champion for a reason. She had defeated Olympic medalists, fighters who had trained their entire lives for moments exactly like this. And more importantly, she had trained under Master Hiroshi Yamamoto, one of the few living masters who still taught the old ways. Not just tournament fighting, but real combat, the kind of martial arts that had been developed on ancient battlefields where losing meant death. Sarah moved like water, flowing between the 3 attackers without seeming to put any effort into it. When Derek threw a punch, she wasn't there. When Kevin tried to grab her, his hands closed on empty air. When David attempted a leg sweep, she was already 3 feet away. But she wasn't just evading. Every time one of them committed to an attack, Sarah countered. A quick strike to Derek's solar plexus left him gasping for breath. A precise kick to Kevin's knee buckled his leg and sent him down to one knee. A palm strike to David's shoulder numbed his entire right arm. Within 30 seconds, all 3 men were hurt and breathing hard, while Sarah looked like she had barely exerted herself. "This is impossible," Derek wheezed, clutching his chest. "Nobody fights like this." "Champions do," said a voice from the doorway. Everyone turned to see an elderly Japanese man walking into the dojo. He was small and thin, probably in his 70s, but he moved with the confident posture of someone who had spent his entire life in martial arts. Sarah recognized him immediately. It was Master Tanaka, the former owner of the dojo. "Master Tanaka," Sarah said, bowing respectfully. "I'm sorry for trespassing in your dojo." The old man waved dismissively. "This building has been empty for too long.
It's good to see it being used for its intended purpose again." He looked around at the 5 men on the floor, some groaning, some trying to catch their breath.
"Though I suspect this wasn't quite what you had in mind when you came here tonight." Derek struggled to his feet. "You know her?" "I know of her,"
Master Tanaka replied.
"Sarah Nakamura. I saw her fight in the World Championships in Tokyo 8 years ago. She defeated Kenji Matsumoto in the final, one of the greatest karate matches I've ever witnessed." He turned to Sarah. "I heard about what happened afterward. The accident with the student. A tragedy, but not your fault. These things happen when people push beyond their limits without proper guidance." Sarah felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. It was the first time in 3 years that anyone had told her the accident wasn't her fault. "I should have stopped him," she said quietly. "I saw that he wasn't ready for the technique, but I wanted to encourage him. I thought I could keep him safe while he learned." Master Tanaka shook his head. "You were teaching a demonstration, not a private lesson. The boy chose to attempt something beyond his skill level. You tried to help him, but sometimes help is not enough. Sometimes accidents happen despite our best efforts." Kevin, who had managed to get back to his feet, looked between Master Tanaka and Sarah with growing understanding. "You said she was a legend," he said, "but it's more than that, isn't it? She's not just some retired tournament fighter. She's one of the best who ever lived." Master Tanaka nodded. Sarah Nakamura was considered by many to be the most complete martial artist of her generation. Speed, power, technique, strategy, she had everything. But more than that, she had heart. She fought with a passion and intensity that inspired everyone who saw her. Derek, still holding his ribs, looked at Sarah with a mixture of respect and embarrassment. "Why didn't you tell us who you were when we first confronted you?" "Because it shouldn't have mattered," Sarah replied. "You decided I was a threat based on nothing but the fact that I was quiet and kept to myself.
My identity doesn't change the fact that you were wrong to harass me. David, cradling his numb arms, spoke up.
We thought we were protecting the town. You seemed suspicious, always avoiding people, never talking about your past.
We thought maybe you were running from the law or something.
I was running, Sarah said.
But not from the law. I was running from my own guilt, from the memory of a boy who got hurt because I wasn't careful enough.
I came here because I wanted to disappear, to find some kind of peace where nobody knew who I used to be. Marcus and James had gotten back to their feet, both looking sheepish and embarrassed. Marcus cleared his throat. We owe you an apology, he said. All of us. We acted like bullies, ganging up on someone we thought couldn't fight back. Sarah looked at each of the 5 men and turned.
They were all genuinely remorseful now, but she wondered if that would have been the case if they hadn't discovered her identity. Would they be apologizing to Sarah Chen, the quiet librarian, or were they only sorry because she turned out to be Sarah Nakamura, the champion?
You're apologizing because you found out I could fight back, she said. But what about the next person who moves to town and seems different?
What about the next outsider who doesn't fit your idea of what belongs in Millbrook? Are you going to terrorize them too? The men exchanged uncomfortable glances.
Derek, who had been the leader of their little group, looked the most ashamed. No, he said finally. No, we won't. You're right. We were acting like bullies, and that's not who we want to be. We were so focused on being the protectors of this town that we became the thing we thought we were protecting it from. Master Tanaka smiled approvingly. That is wisdom, even if it came late. A true martial artist learns not just how to fight, but when not to fight. The strongest person in the room is often the one who chooses not to use their strength. He turned to Sarah. Which brings me to a question for you, young lady.
What are your plans now? Will you continue hiding in libraries and small apartments, or will you consider returning to the life you were meant to live? Sarah shook her head. I can't go back to competition.
Too much has happened. Too much time has passed.
I'm not talking about competition, Master Tanaka said. I'm talking about teaching.
About passing on what you've learned to a new generation. About making sure that what happened to that boy doesn't happen to others because they had better instruction.
The idea hadn't occurred to Sarah. She had been so focused on running from her past that she hadn't considered how she might use her experience to help others. I don't know if I'm ready for that, she said.
Perhaps not yet, Master Tanaka agreed. But this dojo has been empty for too long.
I'm too old to teach anymore, but I'd be willing to lease it to someone who could put it to good use. Someone who could teach real martial arts, not just tournament techniques.
Kevin stepped forward eagerly. I could help. I mean, I know I couldn't teach you anything, but I could help with beginner classes, with administrative stuff.
I'd love to learn from someone with your experience. The other men nodded in agreement.
Even Derek seemed genuinely interested in the possibility. Think about it, Master Tanaka said to Sarah.
You came here to hide from your past, but perhaps what you really need is to embrace it, to take the pain you've experienced and use it to help others avoid similar pain.
Sarah looked around the old dojo, imagining it filled with students, hearing the sounds of training, seeing young people learning not just techniques but discipline and respect and confidence. It was an appealing vision, but also terrifying.
I need time to think, she said. Master Tanaka nodded. Of course. But don't take too long.
This town could use someone like you, and I think you could use this town as well. As the group began to leave the dojo, Derek approached Sarah hesitantly.
I know we got off on the wrong foot, he said, but if you do decide to reopen this place, I'd like to train here.
I've been teaching at the community center, but it's clear I still have a lot to learn. Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of insincerity, but found none. The fight had changed something in all of them, herself included. We'll see, she said.
As Sarah walked home through the quiet streets of Millbrook, she felt different than she had in years. For the first time since the accident, she had used her skills in combat, and nobody had gotten seriously hurt. She had been in control, precise, careful, everything she should have been during that demonstration 3 years ago. Maybe Master Tanaka was right. Maybe instead of running from her past, it was time to use it to build a better future. The next few weeks in Millbrook passed differently than any Sarah had experienced since arriving in the small town.
Word of the confrontation at the old dojo had spread, though the details had grown more elaborate with each telling. By the time the story made it through the local rumor mill, Sarah had supposedly defeated 20 black belts while blindfolded and standing on one foot.
The truth was both more mundane and more meaningful than the legends. 5 men had tried to intimidate someone they perceived as weak and different, and they had discovered that their assumptions were completely wrong.
More importantly, they had learned something about themselves in the process. Derek Morrison was the first to approach her after that night.
He found her at the library on a quiet Tuesday morning, looking genuinely nervous as he approached the circulation desk where she was checking in returned books. "Sarah," he said, then paused, clearly unsure how to address her.
Ms. Chen? Miss Nakamura? Sarah is fine, she replied, not looking up from her work. Derek shifted uncomfortably. I wanted to talk to you about what happened. Not the fight, yes, the fight too, but more about what came after. What Master Tanaka said about the dojo.
Sarah finally looked up at him. Derek was a large, intimidating man. But right now he looked like a schoolboy trying to work up the courage to ask a question he was afraid to hear answered.
I've been thinking about it, she admitted. And I don't know if I'm the right person to run a dojo. I made a mistake once that put someone in the hospital. What if it happens again? Derek leaned against the counter, lowering his voice so they wouldn't be overheard by the handful of patrons browsing nearby shelves. Can I tell you something? He asked. Something I haven't told the other guys? Sarah nodded. I started teaching karate because I thought it would make me feel important. Like I was some kind of guardian of justice, you know? I like the idea of people looking up to me thinking I was tough and wise and all that.
He paused, gathering his thoughts. But watching you fight, seeing how you moved, how you controlled everything, without ever losing your temper or trying to hurt us more than necessary, that's when I realized what martial arts is really supposed to be about.
It's not about being the toughest guy in the room. It's about being so confident in your abilities that you don't need to prove anything to anyone. Sarah considered his words. That's a nice philosophy, Derek, but philosophy doesn't prevent accidents. I was confident in my abilities when Marcus Williams got hurt, and look how that turned out. But you said yourself that he was attempting a technique he wasn't ready for. You were trying to help him, not show off or prove how tough you were. Sometimes bad things happen even when good people are doing their best. It was almost exactly what Master Tanaka had said, and hearing it from Derek, someone who had seen her fight and understood what real skill looked like, gave it additional weight. Over the next week, the other men came to speak with her as well. Kevin Park was eager to discuss technical aspects of martial arts, asking detailed questions about training methods and philosophy. James Rodriguez wanted to know if she would consider teaching grappling techniques alongside traditional karate. Marcus Thompson, perhaps surprisingly, was most interested in the mental aspects of martial arts. How to develop the kind of calm confidence that Sarah had displayed during their confrontation. David Kim was the last to approach her, and his conversation was the most difficult. I need to ask you something, he said when he found her having coffee at the small cafe on Main Street. And I need you to be honest with me. Sarah gestured to the empty chair across from her, and David sat down heavily. That night at the dojo, he continued, you could have really hurt us, couldn't you? I mean, not just what you did, but you could have put us all in the hospital if you'd wanted to. Sarah didn't answer immediately. It was a fair question, and it deserved an honest response. Yes, she said finally. I could have. David nodded, as if confirming something he had already suspected. Why didn't you? Because hurting people isn't the goal. It never should be the goal. Martial arts is about protection, protecting yourself, protecting others, protecting what's important. Sometimes that requires violence, but only as much as necessary, and only when there's no other choice. But you were angry. We harassed you for weeks, vandalized the library, made you feel unwelcome in your own home. Didn't part of you want to make us pay for that? Sarah took a sip of her coffee, thinking about how to explain something that had taken her years to understand. When I was competing at the highest levels, she said, I worked with a sports psychologist who taught me about controlled aggression. The idea is that you can use anger as fuel for performance, but you can't let it control your actions. Anger gives you energy, but technique and strategy determine what you do with that energy. She leaned forward slightly. That night, I was angry. But my anger was directed at the situation, not at you personally. You were acting like bullies, but that didn't make you evil people. It made you people who were making bad choices based on fear and misunderstanding. David was quiet for a long moment. I've been teaching people how to get stronger, how to build muscle, and improve their fitness, but I've never really thought about the mental side of it, about what it means to be truly strong.
Physical strength is just one component, Sarah agreed. And honestly, it's not the most important one.
That weekend, Sarah found herself standing in front of the old dojo on Elm Street, keys in her hand.
Master Tanaka had given them to her the day before,
along with a lease agreement that was so generous it was basically a gift. "I'm too old to see this place stay empty," he had said, "but I'm not too old to see it become something special again." The interior of the dojo needed work. The wooden floors would need to be refinished. The walls needed fresh paint, and all the old equipment would need to be replaced. But the bones of the building were solid, and Sarah could envision what it might look like with some effort and care. She wasn't alone. Derek, Kevin, James, Marcus, and David had all volunteered to help with renovations, and they had recruited several other people from town as well. Mrs. Patterson from the library had organized a fundraising committee. The mayor had promised to fast-track any permits they might need. It seemed like the entire town had decided that Sarah Nakamura's dojo was going to be something special whether she was ready for it or not. Having second thoughts, a voice asked behind her. Sarah turned to find Master Tanaka approaching, moving slowly but steadily across the parking lot. "Third and fourth thoughts," he admitted. "I keep thinking about all the ways this could go wrong." "That's good," Master Tanaka said. "Overconfidence is dangerous in any endeavor, but especially in teaching. The fact that you're worried about your students' safety means you'll take the necessary precautions to protect them." He joined her in looking at the building.
You know, when I first opened this dojo 40 years ago, I was terrified. I had trained for decades, I had won tournaments, I had studied under some of the greatest masters of my generation.
But standing in front of a class of beginners trying to teach them something as complex and potentially dangerous as martial arts, that was the most frightening thing I had ever done. "How did you get past the fear?" "I didn't," Master Tanaka replied with a smile.
"I just learned to use it as a tool instead of letting it use me. Fear keeps you careful, keeps you focused on what's really important. The day you stop being afraid of hurting someone is the day you should stop teaching." Sarah looked at the old building again, trying to imagine it full of students. Children learning their first techniques, teenagers building confidence and discipline, adults discovering what their bodies and minds were capable of achieving. "What happened to Marcus Williams wasn't your fault," Master Tanaka continued quietly. "But that doesn't mean there's nothing you can learn from it. What would you do differently now, knowing what you know about teaching and about accidents?" It was a question Sarah had avoided asking herself for 3 years, too wrapped up in guilt to think constructively about prevention. "Better screening," she said after a moment. "I would make sure students demonstrated competency in basic techniques before attempting advanced ones. I would have assistant instructors helping to spot dangerous situations. I would create a more controlled environment with proper safety equipment." "Those are all good answers," Master Tanaka said. "And they're the answers of someone who has learned from experience, both good and bad. That makes you a better teacher, not a worse one." Over the next month, Sarah threw herself into preparing the dojo. The physical renovations were the easy part: sanding and staining the floors, painting the walls, installing new lighting and mirrors. The harder work was developing a curriculum that would emphasize safety without sacrificing the intensity and challenge that made martial arts meaningful. She reached out to contacts from her competitive days, getting advice on training methodologies and safety protocols. She researched insurance requirements and liability issues. She even consulted with medical professionals about injury prevention and first aid. But perhaps most importantly, she spent time with the 5 men who had become her unlikely allies in this venture. Derek had emerged as a natural leader among the group, taking charge of organizing volunteers and managing the renovation timeline. But Sarah was impressed by how much his approach to leadership had changed since their first confrontation. Instead of using intimidation or aggression to get things done, he motivated people through enthusiasm and genuine care for the project. Kevin brought valuable teaching experience from his work at the community center, along with a deep knowledge of traditional martial arts philosophy. He had started reading everything he could find about Sarah's competition career. Not out of hero worship, but because he wanted to understand how elite-level training could be adapted for everyday students. James contributed practical skills from his auto repair business, along with a down-to-earth perspective that helped keep everyone focused on realistic goals. His wrestling background also provided insights into grappling techniques that Sarah wanted to incorporate into her teaching. Marcus's military police experience proved invaluable when it came to understanding how martial arts training could prepare people for real-world confrontations. He had seen both the benefits and limitations of traditional fighting techniques in actual combat situations. David's fitness expertise helped Sarah design conditioning programs that would build strength and flexibility while minimizing injury risk. He also brought connections with local healthcare providers who could serve as resources for students dealing with training-related issues. Together, they formed an unlikely but effective team, united by their shared experience of that night in the old dojo and their collective desire to create something meaningful. The grand opening was scheduled for the first Saturday in December. Sarah had initially wanted something small and low-key.
But the town had other ideas. What started as a simple ribbon-cutting ceremony had grown into a full community event, with demonstrations, food vendors, and speeches from the mayor and other local officials. 2 days before the opening, Sarah received an unexpected visitor at her apartment. She opened the door to find a woman in her 50s, with graying hair and kind eyes.
Miss Nakamura? The woman said.
My name is Carol Williams. I think you know my son Marcus. Sarah's heart nearly stopped.
Marcus Williams, the boy who had been injured during her demonstration 3 years ago. She had tried to visit him in the hospital, had sent letters and flowers. But his family had made it clear they didn't want to see her.
Mrs. Williams, Sarah managed to say.
How is Marcus? He's doing well, Carol replied. Better than the doctors expected, actually.
He's had to relearn a lot of things, and he'll never be exactly the same as he was before, but he's living independently now. He has a job, friends, a girlfriend.
He's happy. Sarah felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. I'm so sorry about what happened. I've thought about him every day for 3 years. I wish I could have prevented it somehow. Carol studied Sarah's face for a moment, then smiled gently. That's actually why I'm here.
Marcus wanted me to give you something. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope with Sarah's name written on it in careful, slightly unsteady handwriting.
He's been working on this letter for months, Carol explained. He wanted to make sure he said everything right. Sarah took the envelope with trembling hands.
Is he okay with me being here? Opening a dojo? I know it must bring back difficult memories. Actually, it was Marcus who told me about your dojo. He saw an article in the local paper and insisted that I come talk to you. He's very excited about what you're doing here. Sarah couldn't understand.
But why? After what happened? Carol's expression grew serious. Miss Nakamura, what happened to my son was an accident.
A terrible, life-changing accident. But an accident nonetheless. Marcus knows that. He's never blamed you for what happened. She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. The truth is, Marcus is the one who convinced us not to pursue the lawsuit more aggressively. He said he had made the choice to attempt a technique he wasn't ready for, despite your warnings. He said it wouldn't be fair to blame you for his decision.
Sarah stared at the envelope in her hands, unable to process what she was hearing. Read his letter, Carol continued, and know that Marcus is proud of what you're doing. He thinks the world needs more teachers like you, people who care enough about their students to worry about their safety even years after they've stopped teaching. After Carol left, Sarah sat in her apartment for a long time staring at the unopened letter. Finally, she took a deep breath and opened it. The letter was written in careful block letters, each word formed with the deliberate precision of someone who had had to relearn how to write. Dear Ms. Nakamura, my mom says you blame yourself for what happened to me. I want you to know that's wrong. What happened was my fault. You told me the technique was dangerous. You said I should wait until I was more experienced, but I wanted to impress you and the other students, so I tried it anyway. I don't remember the fall, but I remember everything before it. I remember how patient you were when you were teaching us. I remember how you always made sure everyone understood the basic techniques before moving on to harder ones. I remember that you tried to help me when you saw I was doing the throw wrong. The doctors say I'm lucky to be alive. My brain works differently now, and some things are harder for me than they used to be. But I'm not angry about it. Accidents happen, and this one was my responsibility, not yours. My mom told me you disappeared after the accident. She said you stopped teaching and competing. That makes me sad because you were the best teacher I ever had. I learned more about martial arts in that one day with you than I had in months of regular classes. I heard you're opening a new dojo in Millbrook. I think that's wonderful. The world needs more teachers like you, people who really care about their students and want to keep them safe. I hope you'll teach lots of kids and adults to love martial arts the way you taught me to love it. Please don't blame yourself anymore. I'm okay, and I want you to be okay too. Your student always, Marcus Williams. By the time Sarah finished reading the letter, she was crying openly. 3 years of guilt and self-recrimination began to dissolve, replaced by a deep sense of relief and, for the first time in years, the grand opening of Nakamura Dojo arrived with the kind of crisp December weather that made everything feel fresh and full of possibility.
Sarah arrived early to find Derek, Kevin, and the others already there, making final preparations for the ceremony.
The main training area had been transformed. The wooden floors gleamed with fresh stain. Mirrors lined the walls, and new equipment was arranged neatly around the space.
A small shrine in one corner honored Master Tanaka and the traditional roots of karate. Banner hung from the ceiling reading, "Welcome to Nakamura Dojo, where strength meets wisdom." By 10 a.m., nearly half the town had gathered outside the building. Sarah was amazed by the turnout. Families with children, teenagers, elderly residents, even some people she recognized from neighboring towns who had driven in specifically for the event. Master Tanaka arrived wearing a formal black gi with his ancient, well-worn black belt. At his insistence, Sarah wore her competition gi for the first time in 3 years, pristine white, with her name embroidered in both English and Japanese characters. Mayor Henderson gave a brief speech about community and the importance of bringing diverse skills and perspectives to small towns.
Master Tanaka spoke about the history of martial arts and the responsibility that came with teaching others to fight. When it was Sarah's turn to speak, she looked out at the crowd of expectant faces and felt a familiar nervousness. But this time, instead of the paralyzing fear she had experienced for the past 3 years, it was the good kind of nervousness, the kind that meant something important was about to begin. 3 years ago, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the crisp morning air. I thought that by walking away, by hiding, I could prevent anyone else from getting injured because of me. She paused, looking at Derek and his friends, who stood near the front of the crowd. But I've learned something important during my time in Millbrook. Running away from responsibility doesn't make you safer. It just means you're not there to help when people need guidance and support. She gestured toward the dojo behind her.
This school isn't going to be about creating champions or winning tournaments. It's going to be about teaching people to be their best selves, physically, mentally, and spiritually.
It's going to be about building competence, discipline, and respect. And yes, it's going to be about learning to fight, because sometimes fighting is necessary to protect yourself and the people you care about.
The crowd was listening intently now, and Sarah felt her confidence growing. But most importantly, this dojo is going to be about safety.
Every technique will be taught with proper progression. Every sparring session will be carefully supervised.
Every student will learn not just how to execute techniques, but when to use them and when to walk away. She looked directly at Mrs. Death.
So, Patterson, who was beaming with pride, and then at several other faces in the crowd, people who had welcomed her to Millbrook, who had supported her during the harassment, who had volunteered their time and money to make this moment possible. I want to thank this community for giving me a second chance, for showing me that making mistakes doesn't make you a failure. It makes you someone who has the opportunity to learn and do better. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was brief and traditional. Sarah used a pair of antique katana that Master Tanaka had brought for the occasion, slicing through the red ribbon with a clean, precise cut that drew applause from the gathered crowd. Then came the demonstrations. Sarah had planned a series of exhibitions designed to show different aspects of martial arts training. Derek and Marcus performed a self-defense demonstration showing how basic techniques could be used by people with limited training. Kevin led a group of teenagers through a kata, demonstrating the flowing, dance-like forms that were at the heart of traditional karate. James and David worked together to show how martial arts principles applied to physical fitness and mental discipline. Their demonstration focused on breathing techniques, flexibility training, and the kind of body awareness that made martial arts effective for people of all ages and abilities. But the highlight of the day was Sarah's own demonstration. She had debated whether to perform at all, worried that it might seem like showing off. But Master Tanaka had convinced her that people needed to see what real expertise looked like, not to intimidate them, but to inspire them. Sarah performed a kata called unsu, one of the most advanced forms in traditional karate. It was a beautiful flowing sequence that demonstrated every aspect of martial arts. Strikes, kicks, throws, joint locks, and evasive movements, all woven together in a pattern that told the story of a warrior facing multiple opponents. As she moved through the form, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years: pure joy in the practice of martial arts. Not the competitive drive that had motivated her during her championship years, but the simple, profound pleasure of moving her body with precision and purpose. The crowd watched in complete silence, mesmerized by the display of skill and artistry. When Sarah finished the kata with a deep bow, the applause was thunderous. "Any questions?" she asked when the noise died down. Small hands shot up in the crowd. A girl who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. "Are you going to teach kids?" the girl asked. Sarah smiled. "Absolutely. Kids, teenagers, adults, anyone who wants to learn." "Will you teach girls too?" "Of course. Some of the best martial artists I've ever known have been women." An older man in the back called out, "What about people who aren't in great shape?" "I'm 63 and I haven't exercised seriously in 20 years. Martial arts is for everyone," Sarah replied. "We'll work with whatever fitness level you bring,
and will help you improve gradually and safely. Derek stepped forward. When do classes start? Sarah had been dreading this question because it made everything real and official. But looking out at the interested faces in the crowd, she realized she was ready. Monday night, she said. 7 o'clock, beginner class for anyone who's interested. After the formal ceremony ended, people lingered around the dojo, touring the facilities and asking more detailed questions about class schedules and training programs.
Sarah found herself in dozens of individual conversations, each one reinforcing her sense that this was the right decision.
Mrs. Dowd Patterson approached her as the crowd was beginning to thin out. "I'm so proud of you, dear," the elderly librarian said. "When you first came to work for us, I could see that you were carrying some kind of burden. I'm glad you found a way to turn that burden into something beautiful." As the sun began to set, only Sarah, Master Tanaka, and the 5 men who had become her unlikely partners remained at the dojo. "So," Derek said, "how does it feel to be back?" Sarah considered the question. "Different than I expected." "Better than I hoped." Master Tanaka smiled. "The circle is complete. You came here running from your past, but you found a way to embrace it and use it to build something new." Kevin looked around the empty dojo, already envisioning it filled with students. "What's our first priority? Getting equipment set up, finalizing the curriculum, marketing?" "Our first priority," Sarah said, "is remembering why we're doing this. Not for recognition or profit or even personal satisfaction. We're doing this because martial arts has the power to change people's lives for the better, and we have an opportunity to be part of that transformation." She walked to the center of the training area and looked around at the space that would soon be filled with students of all ages and backgrounds, each on their own journey of discovery and growth. 3 years ago, I thought my career as a martial arts teacher was over.
I thought the accident with Marcus Williams meant I could never safely teach anyone again. But I've learned that avoiding risk doesn't eliminate it. It just means you're not there to help manage it when it occurs. She turned to face the group. "We're going to have students get injured here. Not because we're careless or incompetent, but because physical training involves physical risk. When that happens, and it will happen, we're going to learn from it, adapt our methods, and continue teaching. Because the alternative is to let fear control our decisions, and that doesn't keep anyone safe." Derek nodded seriously. "We'll be ready." "I know you will," Sarah said. "All of you have shown me what it means to learn from mistakes and grow stronger because of them." As the group prepared to leave for the evening,
Master Tanaka approached Sarah one last time.
"There's something I want you to have," he said, pulling a small wrapped package from his bag. "I've been saving this for the right person to carry on the traditions of this dojo." Sarah unwrapped the package to find an old black belt, worn and faded with years of use. "This belonged to my teacher," Master Tanaka explained. "He taught me that a black belt doesn't represent mastery. It represents the willingness to continue learning. I think you understand that now better than ever." Sarah held the belt reverently, feeling the weight of tradition and responsibility it represented. "I'll do my best to honor it," she said. "I know you will," Master Tanaka replied, "because you've already proven that true strength comes from facing your fears and using your experiences, both good and bad, to help others." Monday night arrived with a mixture of excitement and nervousness that reminded Sarah of her first tournament as a teenager. She arrived at the dojo an hour early to make final preparations, adjusting the lighting, arranging equipment, and going through her lesson plan one more time. Derek was the first student to arrive, followed closely by Kevin, James, Marcus, and David. But they weren't the only ones. By 7 o'clock, 23 people had gathered in the main training area. There were children as young as 6 and adults as old as 70. There were complete beginners and people with some previous martial arts experience. There were men and women, students and teachers, blue-collar workers and professionals. "Welcome to Nakamura Dojo," Sarah said as the class formed a rough semicircle around her. "Before we begin, I want to establish some ground rules. First, everyone trains at their own pace. There's no shame in taking breaks, asking questions, or admitting when something is too difficult. Second, we're here to support each other, not compete with each other. And third, safety is everyone's responsibility, not just mine." She looked around at the expectant faces. "With that said, let's bow in and begin our journey together." As the class performed their first bow, some crisp and precise, others uncertain but earnest, Sarah felt a deep sense of completeness that she hadn't experienced in years. This was where she belonged.
not hiding from her past but using it to build a better future. The accident with Marcus Williams would always be part of her story. The guilt and shame and years of self-imposed exile would always be part of who she was. But they were no longer the end of her story. They were the foundation for a new chapter built on wisdom earned through suffering and strength discovered through vulnerability. Outside, snow began to fall on the quiet streets of Millbrook, but inside the dojo something was just beginning. First technique, Sarah announced. We're going to learn how to fall safely. Because in martial arts, as in life, learning how to get back up starts with learning how to go down without getting hurt. The students spread out across the mat ready to learn, and Sarah Nakamura, 7-time world champion, the woman who had disappeared and found herself again, began to teach.